And hello, Rafi. Happy to have you.
Hello.
Okay, we're good to go, and we'll finally start talking. How about that? This week, week 5, is going to be going over detailing interiors and introducing Grayscale to all of that. Some of the stuff that I want to talk about that I had never gotten the opportunity to go over is prop design and how you can approach style through understanding proportions and basic shapes. The benefits to that is once you understand that you can break things down at a very simple macro scale, helps you with getting into the micro stuff. Here's a preview of what the assignment will be this week, which is to either pick your best interior from last week's push-ups or thumbnail some new things along with references so you can get a believable interior space. And we would want to push that to as high a level of a finish as you can get, or at least a medium high, and then add grayscale to it. So this would be a potential for one of your first type of portfolio pieces. Before I do get started, I had forgotten to add my notes to my private notes channel. Thought that I had. Yeah. So now I've got that pulled up and we can go through things. Let's pull this in. I might not have notes all of the time because I've got this image that I put together. I was going through thumbnails and trying to come up with an interesting shot that we could work from, and also kind of double this up as a portfolio project for an IP pitch that I've wanted to do. So I'm just showing the general process here that I came up with 8 thumbnails. It started off with just sketching anything that I thought could be in the universe, which this is a fantasy story set in the Slavic area, so Finland, Norway, right? Maybe. Um, it's an old kind of medieval fantasy, think Rapunzel and all that sort of thing, but it's about Kashyyyk the Deathless, the basically first tale of the Horcrux in Harry Potter, which he was cursed and then saved his spirit in a hidden object so that he could never die, which is how Voldemort lives in Harry Potter. So I started off sketching environments for Kashyyyk, or the princess finding like a hidden soul room in his castle or something. But then I decided to do the princess's bedroom, and I was thinking about the idea that she might have asked Kashyyyk, who does love her just in a very twisted way, he is holding her captive, to decorate her room. So she makes it overwhelmingly cute, but you can see the fringes of a cold dungeon. So there would be stones on the edges, and there's only one tiny window for light. But she has surrounded it with plants and wallpaper and things like that to make it more homely. I liked that idea. I was thinking about kind of an attic space, or then I just started going to Princess bored in a castle. Because there is a point in the story where she is just trapped in a normal castle rather than trapped in the villain's castle. Anime Guy on YouTube says you're recommended to watch this. Hey, buddy. So, welcome. We're going to be going over interior spaces, how to detail them, how to do prop design. Before we get into everything that could go into that, let's go over some stuff about interiors. We'll talk about brainstorming for an interior space. Let's bring in the thumbnail that I liked the most. Alright, so we've got this image and we want to think about everything that could go in this space. So I'm going to make a mind web, a mind map, and we're going to be talking about, what is her name? Vasilisa is her name in the story. And you guys can hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay, good. And we want to think about all the sorts of things that could go in a room to convey the feeling that she is trapped and bored. Some things that she might do to entertain her time would be things like books. And I'm going for more of an animated style, so working with animation is all about playing up the humor or how ludicrous something can get by just making the point so overblown that somebody can't miss it. So we want books, we want board games. At this point in time, it would probably be something like chess. In a princess's room, we have probably a nice castle, not a nice castle, but a nice bed, which I have there. The bed is ornate. Maybe with the books, she has a sitting area to read her books. And in order to read, she needs lighting, so light sources, which would be things like candles, chandelier, but I don't know if that makes much sense in a small room. Fireplace, she's in a tower, no source of heat other than a fireplace. To make her feel trapped, she might have I went with the idea of a very small window. We've seen in lots of animated movies before that, as a joke, they'll play up somebody counting down the days of how long they've been in the tower. So maybe there's a calendar in view somewhere. She'll need a wardrobe. Is she clean or is she messy? Maybe she's messy, so she's left a lot of her clothes on the floor. But that doesn't feel very princessy either, or for the time. So maybe not. Not everything that gets written has to become an idea. In order to have chess, we might need a small table. Next to a bed, you might have a nightstand. And then there might be shelves, and on those shelves, or maybe hanging would be plants. She never goes outside, so she wants to make it feel like it's outside inside. I know that a lot of this would be medieval or European in theme, so we can always have that as a baseline. I think the floor would be cobblestone. I'm going to shrink this down. Anime guy on YouTube is asking, is this a storyboarding concept? Well, not quite. What I have here on the frame is a thumbnail, which in some ways that can be a storyboard, but we are going for environment sketching and specifically interior detailing this week. And right now we are brainstorming ways to fill out the interior and all of the sorts of natural things that a person might need inside a believable space. Cobblestone floor, but we want it to be homey. So making it homey would have things like rugs, cloth. Homey is also warm, so that would go back to having a fireplace somewhere that can make it feel warm. She needs a place to prepare herself. What is that? Just, you know, like makeup. And that's probably good. We can go there. So this is called a mind map. You can find examples online, usually for more business-oriented ideas rather than this, but it is a good way to navigate everything that you might need. So it's a good idea to start with this sort of thing so that you can work your way and start understanding details before just going on all willy-nilly. When you start here, it's all about just playing around. What kind of shapes, what kind of lines can you put down to get across your initial idea? Then you have to think, okay, what is everything that's in this scene? What is this? Is there going to be more stuff around this so it's not as boring? This is a lot of empty space. Is that going to be just cobblestone, or is there going to be stuff on the floor that gives us some storytelling that could help lead the eye and tell us more about her personality? Everything in a frame, if we have a frame this large and she's over here, everything in this frame needs to support her story. And that's the idea and goal for interior shots. Alright, so I am looking at my notes for the next sort of thing that we want to do. Let's talk about framing very lightly, real quick. Framing is the practice of using different objects in a scene to push the eye. So there's things like just basic framing. You can think about your proportions. So again, I'll write them down. We've got proportions like 70-30. 60-40 is as close as you want to get to the middle. Then you've got 80-20 and 90-10. I've heard Will Weston describe the reason we don't want to do 45-55 is because you can't easily tell a difference. It's too close to the middle, things being the same. When you want someone to look at an image, especially in animation, which is not the core focus of this class, but it's where I'm heading, you don't want to just have something that is that so? Is that kind of? No, we just want to get the point across. 70-30 is the most popular, but the others are often just as used, and they have different effects. So when you're making framing or deciding things like big, medium, small, and all of your design principles, you can think of these proportions at play. And that goes into framing as well. Here I'm going to do 2 horizontal lines, and then on the 1/3 mark, so this would be the 70-30, I'm going to divide this frame. What does this frame do? This frame closes off this area and has this area larger and more appealing. It also acts as a divider, and this is what I have done in this image, which is basically that 70-30 divider right there. And what that does is it confines her in the left space, making her feel like she is in her zone, and then the rest of the living space, which is more open, allows us for our eye to move around there without getting distracted about what she's doing. So by exploring what this kind of framing does, we can think about how this arrow moves here and these are all compressing towards this. So this becomes not as important. This is more important, and this is less important. Oops. You can explore what different kinds of framing might do for us. So if you have, let's pick 40 here and 20 here. And by 20, I just mean 20% along this route. So 40, and maybe the same idea there. What kind of framing does this create for us if this were to become real objects in a scene? Well, again, the smaller sides become less important. These frames feel like they are pushing on us. Like if this were an entrance, if this were the inside of a building, and you've got, you know, stuff, a fan, light switch, and then you had the outside, maybe these are sand dunes or something, it's going to feel like you are looking outside, that you have to look underneath, that you have to look through. That's what that kind of frame effect creates to us. It doesn't have to be just that space. With that framing device, it could also be something like a tree trunk in a foreground and a bunch of clouds on the top. And then you're free to explore what you want in this area with basic shapes, of course. Composition. Let's try one more. Maybe we do that diagonal, but we mirrored it on both sides, and we box in everything. This creates a very closed-off effect. This might be something where you want to focus only on the subject in the middle. Is it a garage and there's a big truck here and things like that? Is it a computer screen with a person's head in front of it and they're reading stuff and looking at a bunch of code, and then you have things that's a jumble of nonsense techie stuff on the side? It can be all sorts of things that you can play with that idea. But the idea being that maybe that's a shelf and there's stuff blocking vision to guide the eye by framing it and pushing in to the most available space. All right. One more. Let's say that you have a room that actually has a bunch of stuff in it. How would we frame this in a way that can guide our eye to a person, a point of interest? We could either identify this as the point of interest, or this, or we could, we would redraw our composition if there was something else we wanted to support here. But we've gone over certain principles like grouping shapes for leading the eye, and that will be very powerful here as well, but this is also framing. And you can think about how the floor is creating part of that abstract frame effect. So at a baseline, we're coming into this wall, and this is the main point of interest. If we want to frame it even further, so that we're looking at something here or here, from an abstract notion, we might block this off. So how would we do that? That could be the open door. This side is no longer valuable anymore. You might fill it with clutter, but there's now nothing that could be drawing the attention away because you are, from an abstract purpose, trying to make that less important and squeezing the eye this direction. We will introduce the ceiling. We'll bring the ceiling a little lower. And now we have this box framed for us. Now let's think about, if we have shelves, does that do what we want? No, because there's not really a proportional rule that is providing that kind of pressure for us. How about if we did an additional square, an additional box, and made that a window? These are tight spaces, and now they are framing in exactly how you would frame a window, of course, into this one area where there is a computer screen. Maybe it's been left on, or maybe there's a person sitting on it, sitting at it. You would top that off with leading lines, clutter, rugs, everything that could support and point to our main focal. So these are some framing devices that you can keep in mind when creating a composition. All right, let's pull in our reference again. And while this is not necessary to the full workflow, especially if you're working in realism, you could just zoom in and start detailing out things. We're going to be going over how to get a high level finish and to think about our design before we put things there. So we'll be going over prompt design. There's some things to know about design before we just jump into it. If we want to talk about stylization, if that's something of interest to you guys, it certainly is to me. Stylization is a result of basic shapes and proportions. Basic shapes would be things like a triangle, a square, and a circle. If we want a normal tree, a palm tree, is how I've seen this example used. We would have this. And that might be realism. But what if we want to stylize it some? Well, if we have a circular shape language, we have a triangular or a squarish. Perhaps for circular, we might have something more like rounded curves. Everything is described this way. You might have it wave. If you want it triangular, you might think about hard lines, creating triangles wherever possible, and doing something more like this. If you wanted a square-like palm tree, you may even try adjusting the proportions of it. So now we have something up here, and square fronds. Notice that I was erasing these tick marks just because I'm personally trying to practice big, medium, small design with my space allocation. When I put these lines here, I was thinking about how this was 30% of the way up to the top. And if I had put these lines here, I was going to have equal space. So I instead put them up here so that we have a larger, big space in the middle. Design can come in at every single aspect of a drawing. So that's some basic about that. If we think about proportions a little bit more, let me shrink this down. And we think about the division of these proportions. When we have 30/70, 20/80, 90/10, and oh yeah, let's put 40/60. So that we can have a visual representation of it. 40/60 would be something like here. If this were the 50 mark, 90/10 would be more like this. 20/80, if this were 50, 40, 30, 20. 30/70 be more like that. So these kinds of ideas where you have something really big and then you push to the side, that can become a story moment, right? That can become something like all this visual clutter of squares and things. And then in the middle you put a circle. That would be 90/10. That's an example of 90/10. Or it could be in a frame. It could be the entire image. Maybe this is a truck that is on its side, and you have a street and there's a person trapped under it. (90/10). So that sort of idea. 40/60. The reason that we want to avoid 50/50, unless on purpose, is that straight in the middle, there is no feeling of push and pull. They're equal sizes. And if you do 45/55, it's not enough of a change to be able to tell a difference. So, when could you do 50/50? Symmetry. Straight down the middle, you have things on the side. You want balance, you can go horizontal. Equal sides on top, equal sides on bottom for a very still image. Stuff like that. I'm going to be riffing directly off of some notes that a friend of mine had taken about proportions because it's really nice. So let me write it down again. If we have a lamp, and that lamp is like this, this might be a more realistic lamp. And this might be something like a 90/10 proportion. But let's say you wanted 20/80. You might squeeze that proportion down. Let's steal this. So now if this is the 10% of this 90, and we want to make this smaller but keep that the same size, let's shrink it down. Let's bring it down to here. It feels a little bit different now. You've made it more squat. If you wanted to go further, how might you mess with proportion? You might copy this out again. And let's say we still just want this mainly. But now this is going to be a little more squat. We're going to squish it down more. And we want the bar itself to be the 70%. Now we've expanded out the idea of this so that 30% of it is to this broad idea, squashing the proportion. And now this might feel a little more at home in an animated movie. If you were to push that even further so that there is equal weight between both the base and the lamp aspect, you might go even more squat. So now you're going to bring this down here. Widen this some. And since we're going even chunkier, we might lose some of that detail. All the same lamppost, but all proportioned differently to fit a different design purpose of stylization. You can also think about proportional relationships, so let's combine these. if you have a box, a square, first of all, is a 50-50 relationship. This is perfect. It's an equal thing. If you were to take this and make it 30-70, or 1/3, 2/3, let's think about that. One-third, and then take that length and double it. That's a basic rectangle. But now you could also try flipping it. That becomes a basic rectangle as well. If you wanted to push that and go 40-60, or what if you had something like this, squat, and only just kind of push it up. Let's call this 40-60. It's a little taller than a square, but it's not quite one. Let's push it just a little more so it's more noticeable. Again, that might be in the 45-55 realm. It has to be enough that you can get a sense of the proportional difference in order for proportions to work and have that sense of push and pull. So if you wanted to have like a car design, you've got 1/3 and then 2/3 in height. Maybe you have the top of that car, and there is a car design in animated proportions. You can try to push that even more, 90-10 in height. And you can play with those shapes in all sorts of different ways. That's how you achieve stylization as we see it in animated movies. So let me get my bearings on what we need to address next. Okay, let's talk about spatial division, because this is important for interiors and exteriors, and how those proportions change how we feel about something. So like we know, we've got 70-30, we've got 80-20, we've got 90-10. And this will play in with framing, with objects, with how we lay our horizon line, everything. Proportion comes into design, which in an interior space, when you can imagine a camera however you need to, this is all extremely important for how you go about telling your story. If we have 50-50, our focal point may be right in the middle. If you have 90-10, it can be something as simple as straight horizontal and up here. Maybe you're doing 90-10 again, so the main interest is something like that. But you can also play with triangular shape design, and now you've got a 90, or you've got a 10%, 90% here. Maybe you've got that 10% again, or 90% blocking something off like that. These are still 90-10 principles, but implemented in new ways. 10% vertical, 90% horizontal, 10% on the edges. The same can go into how you plan out. We went over framing, but if you wanted a 30% horizon line, 70% of the image, and then you think about 30% being blocked off, now this is clouds, and you go circles as your shape choice. That would work. And maybe this leading line is leading to something in the distance that fits within your shape rhythm. Things about triangles is that they are inherently off balance. So in a frame, this creates without saying, this creates some sort of push and pull. So you can use triangles to your advantage that way. That's why squares and circles often have different purposes. And the last that we can talk about would be things like rhythm and proportion on it. For instance, maybe we've got this line, and on it you put a bunch of hills. So this might be really highly concentrated. And it might have its own rhythm to it, but then you'll space it out more. So that this is along, a 60 line. Let's move rhythm out of the way. So you are balancing your placement and your concentration of things along this rule. 40% concentrated, 60% sparse. You can bring this idea into shape division. So if you have a bunch, maybe you have an idea like this, and along that you fill it with squares. But at every focal point, you add circles, like I demonstrated earlier, and along this rhythm line. They will naturally speak out differently than if you had tried to use similar shape language or didn't concentrate in that way. Didn't concentrate your portions. So this, I think, would be an example of a 90-10. Same here would be high concentration of something. With a small thing. All different ways of, these are very noticeable ways of dealing with proportion, but good stuff to keep in mind. Alright, so let's look over my image one more time before we get into prop design itself and think about ways that this image can be improved, because I was just sketching willy-nilly. If I want to have, I'm going to think in very basic shapes so that I don't have to think about anything else other than the abstract design of the image. I have a focal point. I have her, and I have this space. We've talked about framing, and I have this area, squeezing her in so that we know to look at her. And then I have this rug along the floor that is both pointing at her and also making this less important by pointing up here. by pushing, not necessarily pointing. What are ways or rhythms that I could use to improve this? I'm asking myself because I don't have a written answer for this right now. It's just, how do I go about navigating this to guide our eye to what we want to see? So, books are squares, right? It's a collection of squares. If we, thinking back to our mind map earlier, I talked about really want to overload the whole space with squares, or with books. So this is probably not enough. We probably want to do something like filling up. You know, we can get some extra depth between this bed here if we add more books. And do a couple stacks of them. This also plays into what I had talked about before in the previous week, which was blocking off corners and the importance of that, which I tried to do in all corners here besides this one, which was I put a chest set here. I put the hint of a wardrobe, the bed cloth walls off the top. So all of those are preventing dead corners. And now we want to also try and guide the eye out of those corners. So if I have the idea of wanting to go this way, I might concentrate a lot more books here and then space out some pamphlets or some notes, maybe a pencil or two, so that it leads in a nice triangle shape. Lots and lots of books, because this is an animated idea and we want everyone to get the idea that she has gone through a lot of books. Maybe there's a small bookshelf under here that contains them and it's overflowing. That's, you know, that adds even more to the idea that it's not that she just has them all over the place, it's that she has a spot where she can hold books, but that's not even enough for her. She's reading them, they're all over the book, all over her bed. So we have that leading line, it's concentrated. Then I could even go into the idea of this chess table. It's a circle, which, going over what we had just thought about, may not be the best idea. What if we change that to a square and we change her bed to an oval shape? So now and that would also match with this chair idea over here. So I might, let's make an oval and let's warp this into perspective so that it's how I want it to sit. It might change the design a little bit, but we can expand and work around it. It might be weird, but it's also an interesting choice, I suppose, for a design idea. So we've got all these squares, and then it's shifted through circular shape language. If that doesn't work, you know, we're not beholden to it. It may be that she is the circular device that leads the eye. I want this window to feel small, and I also wanted, these were intended to be plants, so that's the only place that plants can grow because there's only one source of real sunlight. I was wondering about, you know, the idea that is it even smaller? Is it even smaller of a window? How small can we push this? When it's in grayscale, it would be one of the only main sources of light, but there's also a fireplace back here. So that fireplace is going to create a backlight to provide a rim light on her and add a glowing effect to silhouette her in darkness. So at this stage, I'm also thinking of lighting as well. So it's okay if this doesn't have a huge light source. It might offer just a small glint of main light on her profile and then afford that rim light. So I think it could still be a pretty good lighting setup. It might be really fun for this to be as small as it is. It might be a little on the nose, but we could try a triangle as the window shape. Or we could wall it off with some curtains. So the window itself doesn't have to be a triangle. Okay, that makes sense. And then, let's think, we've got this dresser. She may need a chair for that. And now I want to make sure that the cobblestone is creaking out, and we can see that this isn't this happy-go-lucky, luxurious place. She has made it her home. Okay, what else can we do? I'm seeing that we can have this through line of rhythm to the window by following the path of the books up to the fireplace into this chair area. So what might we do there? And then we'll call it good. I'm going to think about framing and rhythm. So we got 2 circles at a point of interest, and then the rest are squares. And so maybe this would be a circle, so that it's that additional point of interest with shape language. And then we add a bunch of square-like things. I don't know, squares on the ground, squares on this overhang. Too equal in size, so we'll just stick with her circle mirror. And then plants. The plants are starting to grow. Nah. We'll just add some plants that are hanging from squarish. And so we've got all of this busyness leading along, but then we have areas of rest and a singular focus. I might pare back on that so that we can... I'm thinking about the proportion of clutter to rest area, and everything surrounding it is going to be noise. It also just so happens to allow for a lot of storytelling and the idea that where we want to look is not necessarily all of the clutter, but the most important and interesting parts of the image. So we kept them clear so that they feel more important. Okay. Now we'll talk about prop design a little bit. For this prop design, let's think about... I'm gonna pull up my personal references. I know that it's small thanks to the iPad's aspect ratio, so sorry about that. But what I've got here is looking at, see, I was referencing her for my idea, and I've got references of different attics, different rooms, stylized medieval design. Great example of proportions here. So you can see here on the left we've got a 10% desk, which in itself is a 2080 in proportion. Very long, very squat. Then that makes up 10% in height of this doorway. You've got big, medium, and small picture frames. Yeah, just very, very good design. I'm not exactly sure what that is from or what it was for. I've got the ideas of clutter in this attic. Okay. So prop design, let's just tackle that from without needing to get into my project. Let's think about stylization and how we might go about stylizing just an object. Let's think about a vase, and so a vase or a pot. What's that desert movie? I love it. City of Egypt? No. Prince of Egypt. I don't know if I would just find it. I don't know if this is a professional's work, but it's something, so. And let's look up just props. Prop visual development. This one works. Whoops, I don't know what I just... I'm following them now. Okay. I don't want that. I'm following them again. How did that happen? And let's just look for one more example of a vase or a pot. Great example of stylization, though. We can use that. We're on the right track. Okay, we'll just go with this because I can't find anything else. Don't want to hold you guys up. All right. our vase design is going to be this guy. So let's get those realistic proportions in. Excuse me, guys. Okay, so we have a vase, and we might have rhythms going around like this. I won't do the tree thing. If we want to look at stylization or proportions for how we would design our own prop, we can look at what other prop designers have done for visual development and analyze their style ideas. So what I'm seeing here is wonkiness, offset, and broken lines. I'm going to bring it in so that we can have this in our notes. Broken straights. Nothing in this visual language has a straight line. So if you use a ruler, that's deaf to you in this universe. Even so, when we see squares and rectangles, a common idea in animation is that things are heavier on the top than they are on the bottom, because it just adds to that off-kilter wonkiness that doesn't make sense. That can't really work. Why would you have done that? So rectangles have an offset to them. Let's say a 3% offset. Just slightly. There's a little bit of hard edgeness, so thin lines and curves are contrasted by hard corners. And that is evidenced by here. It's not just a perfect curve, but it has an edge to it. That sort of idea. The most similar shapes here would be these lamps, and I find this interesting how the top here is not perfect, and this is not a perfect ellipse. These are very sharp ellipses, but you still get the idea because it's mirroring the concept of how an ellipse should appear, but instead sharp corners. Broken top. And you can see that how this has a different proportion than that. Broken top. This is broken. All sorts of things like that. So, ellipses have corners. Even just thinking about the idea from a design standpoint is silly. And let's see, this one is more of an actual circle, but it's got a sketchiness to it that creates some wonk, some hardness but it's going to create that style, and see how every single rectangle has some tapering to it. So don't worry about perfectness. Don't worry about what the shape is. You can kind of draw very freely in this style. It kind of pulls off the idea of a sketch. Some lines have a bit of a bend to them, maybe not a curve, but it would be a jagged curve. And that's kind of how you might go about assessing the rule set of a style. If you wanted to apply this to our vase, let's think about those rules. Let's think about how, let's copy this over first. We might keep, oh, selection is empty. Okay, let's mash it all together. We might keep the proportions for now, but we want to edit this so that it starts to look the way the style does. So some hard tapering. No line is perfect, and they're also not curved. This one's going to go in a little too far. Sharp edge. And if we want that hard idea there, so let's play up that curve and bring it in some so that we can get that transition. And then change this ellipse. So while minute, the stylistic changes that I made would help fit this in the visual development of this universe. Let's bring this guy down again. It's the same thing, but drawn more harshly, like this visual development. If we wanted to play with the design of this even more, we can also think about how we would squash the proportions of this. And we went over that idea earlier, but let's say we want to really stretch things out. An easy way to do this is, instead of just redrawing, let's copy this and mess with the actual proportion. What if we stretch this out? And draw on top. there is a new vase design. You can now use both of these, and they would fit in the same shape language, or same form language. I should use instead. You could put both of these in a room, but they're different vases that use the same principles. Let's try it one more time. Now let's edit this one. Let's make it very skinny. And let's push and pull this idea. So we'll have a very wide bottom and a very tall top. And we can keep going. Okay, that works for me. So we'll reduce that opacity and draw on top. So I'm looking at these lines again. I'm seeing hard line, maybe a little bit more of a wonk to the shape here. All right. Three vase designs. And you can just keep going with this as an exercise. You can bring up a different show that you like, Steven Universe, the new Arcane. It's more realistic, but you could see, and it's more painting style rather than the line style. But you can always go into a property and break down its rule sets to look the way that you want something to look. And this sort of focus of idea is how we want to approach our prop design. Back to our world. Okay. I need to make sure that I show you guys how I go about detailing. There are some key things that I want to know what they look like before I just go in. And so I'll need to pull up a couple references. But I'm going to hop back into my full image. I think I may have one already of what I can steal from a bed idea. These two. So I'm seeing this one is very whimsical and curvy, and that's where I got the reference from. Or this one is cloth. Now, which one am I gonna do? Before I get into it, does anyone know what kind of bed this is called? If I could look up reference, would one of you guys be able to help the person out? Do you know what that's called?
Is it a 4-poster bed?
A full poster?
Yeah.
Okay, let's look it up. Okay, okay, thank you very much. Tudor style. Well, what do you know? That's right in the era. It's interesting that it has a back to it. Let's see. This is the kind of thing that I was interested in. Seems like my circle idea for the bed may not work out, which is okay. Okay. If I'm going to try and bring this into the style of Klaus, and I found artists who worked on Klaus, like this is Fibard, like I think his name is Fibard Denis, or Denis. I'm looking at some of these props, and stuff that I'm identifying is everything has that offset, but here shapes are more perfect. When you have internal shapes, they're going to be offset within their offset. So you get supreme wonk within them. Things are a little bit bigger than they need to be, but if there's more than one of them, the next one is going to be very small. Hard edges where they can. So here's some Klaus props. It's fairly realistic, but very geometric, is how that feels to me. Hard edges, same with those sharp ellipses, but if you go for a circular one, then really go in on it. Look at this shape design on these things. Like they're explicitly going with circles, hard edges. Okay, so now we got some furniture. We've got vertical offset, but then the straight lines are straight inside of it. Big facade shapes with small verticals, thin verticals. We have that 1/3, 2/3 rule with the chairs. So good to keep in mind. Okay, what else can we find? Well, there's some vase examples, very squat vases. And do I have anything else? I do. Chandeliers, table items, extremely squat, then very tall. So we're seeing a lot of 80-20 rule to independent elements. Okay, so with vertical props, which would be with that Tudor style bed, it's got ornamentation on it. I may really push out the expansion of the ornamentation with these more diamond-like ellipses, or even this sort of broad shape. Okay. So mine, the reason I did the thumbnail first is one, so that I know where I'm going, but two, so that I can design on top without starting with a prop and not a black hole, but can't remember the word. But I don't want to draw without having something to go off of. So if the normal, bring this down in opacity more and make my color black. If a normal image is of this would be this plus some shape, shape, and some rings, then I would try shrinking this down, making this more squat, also breaking up that division as well. And that's what we're going to try to do. Before I do so, we'll talk about getting perspective in place once we get to the detailing stage. When I had first thumbnailed all of my things, I didn't worry about a grid. That was because I have enough experience with it now that I can see the perspective for a full scene. But if you guys need to, and I'd highly recommend it, work with a grid as often as you need to. And let's say I'm making a decision right now of where I want my converging lines to push different things because my perspective wasn't perfect. Do I want to maintain the angle of the wall on the right and then change how her bed is positioned? Or do I want to maintain that and have a slightly less harsh angle? I think I'll maintain her bed position. And then I have to zoom out for this grid. So I'm just looking back and forth, checking. Is it as wide or as long as I want it to be? That works. And then since the perspective's a little high, the horizon line I mean, I'll add a bit of a third point so that we give that natural believability. Yeah. Working in 3-point is up to you. In animation, it might, let's, for the sake of it, let's not even do 3-point because a lot of animation does not do that. It keeps things more graphic. Plus, we're already dealing with the offset in all of the shapes and stylization. So if it's starting from a 2D, then we don't necessarily need all that. Okay. I might have... I'm going back into my prop design. I want really thin posts, a large bulbous entity here, then topped with a very thin but wider bottom. This is going to come out into another bulb, which I might keep smaller so that it creates a bit of an upside down triangle gesture. All for that to come down in space into a squat block, because that block is then going to transition down to a post. Hi, Luna. I might need to take a small just step away for a minute because my dogs are begging to go outside. Okay, then we have V. Post. Alright, hope you guys don't mind. I'm gonna step away real quick. I'll be right back. Alright, I'm back. Sorry, guys. While I was away, I also was thinking about some of the other things I need to show to you. But let's get in here and talk about beyond just proportional design. We'll do a bit of orthographic design as well. And I'm going to switch the image. And go into symmetry mode. So what I'm looking at here is the reference on the side. I want a bit of a offset to this, and then inside of it is going to be something like this. I'll probably expand this one out. So the next one is smaller in comparison. Go back to symmetry mode so that we can get some floral design. Let's check this out. And I'm going to simplify that quite a bit. What I'm doing here is trying to take what I'm seeing and make it more approachable. We don't need all of that realistic, ornate detail for the style that I'm going for. If you wanted to, you could even take that image and cut it out, distort it in perspective. In fact, I'll just show that to you for those who want to maintain a realistic style. You could expand that out. Now you have a floral asset page or design that you can keep on either a separate file or a separate layer, and then pull that in and manipulate it however you need to fit on a wardrobe that's positioned like that, maintain a similar form or shape language on a different object but use the same pattern, all of that. I'm going to refer to one of my references that has a lot of wood grain and see what they do. I'm remembering that the wonk is offset in the Klaus style, and then I'll just add hints of big, medium, and small wood grain, some circles here and there. And that might be my prop design. I'm going to come in here and I'm thinking about that big and small relationship. So what I can do now is pull that layer away and go into my drawing, drop it in, and I will label this asset so that I can have my own asset page. And for now, I'll duplicate this and bring it into my sketch. You can then use masking, which if people aren't familiar with, it's basically an impermanent eraser. Everything that is in white is visible, but if you draw in black, it erases out. So I'm erasing the part that would be behind another object, and I'm only left with my prop. So you can systematically go through everything in the scene. For instance, I'll bring up this asset again. Oops. And while this doesn't make sense for the exact thing that this is intended to be, I'll still use it. Thanks to it being in 2 point, I don't have to worry about the perspective, and I can maintain that visual wonk. I'll combine them down, and then I'll go over with my normal pen. So I'm extruding back into space. And now you have a furniture object. And I'd say that that would fit in a class style. You render that appropriately and that would look at home with these guys. So things like furniture and architecture work really well for that method. For more bulbous things or round objects, you can design them in a way that allows for you to reuse them in multiple instances. So when you draw a barrel, you don't want to just draw a barrel from an orthographic view, because this limits your context, the amount of context that you can use it within. If you were to copy this out and put it down here, and maybe your horizon line is up here, well, you'd have to spend a decent amount of time shifting this around. Maybe you'd warp, but it's going to mess with the thickness of your lines. So I've seen a recommendation to, well, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't know how this would be any better. But if you have this middle ground, what's the word? Degree to your ellipse. This will allow for you, I think the point is that it is a middle ground, so if you had to go really far down and you were looking downwards at an object, you could more easily warp this. So that is looking down more than the other one, and if you were to copy it again, you could either try stuff like flipping everything in here. You might have to go one at a time, but then you would start to have that idea. So let's flip and shrink it. And since this, we would think about this being an asset that had stuff designed on it, we would want to flip that as well. And now that's more in the perspective of the horizon line that we have. So that's the sort of idea that you want to do when creating assets that have ellipses to them, that are rounder in nature. Either design them to spec for the frame that you need, or if it's a whole project, you want to design for multiple use cases and making it easier to do so. So let's think about what we'll do next, and this will be the last design that I do with you guys, and then we'll move into homework. If we have extra time, we can hop back into this if you guys want to see more, but I think we're doing okay with the information we've been provided. I'm going to, let's see, focus on this window. Possibly. Yeah, because we can talk about leaves, things like that. Okay. Well, let's screenshot that. And pull it into my asset workshop. Go into symmetry mode. Okay, so I want it to be circular some way, but it also needs to be a window that makes sense. So I'm going to offset. And maybe there's a circular top. Now if I want bars to go over it, I want them to be dividing in the same proportional system that we had been talking about before, as well as going down like so. So let's fight this just a tad. Okay, that has a good level of offset to it. And each one is going to have a little end tip, because I'm thinking about the transition points that we went over last week. And to make sure that these look dangerous, I'm going to give them pointy ends, which is using triangle shape language to know that that is the dangerous part. That's the part that is not nice to us. I thought it would be fun to add like a hardcore lock to this. I don't even know how it would work. I just think that maybe see, I'm even going to try to design this in orthographic first. And let's add a big keyhole. I don't know what a keyhole looks like, but I can kind of imagine. let's bring that onto my design. So by doing this, and I'm going to change this up a little bit so that it has additional geometry. Just a massive lock. I thought that would be funny, so let's mirror that again. For one, that would be, I need to do some masking to get this to look right. So if this was in front, we wouldn't see these bars. But then if this is behind a bar, we wouldn't be seeing it. Yeah, kind of. Something like that. Oh well. And now we are close to finishing this prop. But let's add a little bit more stuff. It froze, so I'm gonna try re-entering. There we go. Double up those lines. Just so that they look real. And what else would be around this? There would be a frame. It might be a cobblestone frame. I'm going to do that on another layer just to make sure. And then I'll compress it all down once I am happy with what I have. But might be like this. Make sure that we have a keystone shape on top. And let's divide this. We want a big shape and a small one. I'm also going to think about how this has to be divided, and it's going to be a small prop when put into the scene, so I don't want to overload this with detail. This is just getting in the basic idea of where we want to go. I'm going to add some fake perspective. Knowing that it's going to look a certain way with when I have it positioned. Then I'll break this up in certain ways, like 20-40, 20-40, and that's an opportunity for me to add some wobble to this, because these are cobblestones. And when designing cobblestones and stuff, it's really about the edges, the connections for the stones. It won't look like they're actually sitting on top of each other until you have these breaks in the silhouette. And we are figuring things out. Kind of looks like a sarcophagus, which I think makes this even more fun. I like that idea. I'm not sure what this is, so I'll just pull it up to be more window. All right, that would be my prop. I'm gonna keep a duplicate of this lock because maybe I'd want to reuse that. But otherwise, I'll put the locks on their own layers and the window on its own. And bring that into our scene. I want to reiterate that what I'm doing here is a very precise method, and I won't use it all of the time, you know? There are some objects that don't require all this planning, but I'm designing out my key objects, the stuff that I want to be a little more presented. And then stuff that would require a lot of work in perspective that you don't want to deal with. So symmetrical, architectural stuff, furniture, the fireplace, like that would definitely design it in orthographic view first and get that design language down. But for small props, if this is a mirror, knowing what I know from the language of what we've seen, I know that I'd want to do something like this. And then if I painted that up, it would have a reflection in it from the other side of the room and all that. So I can design that, gesturing it in. I can put some props that I don't even know. Lipstick. Do they have lipstick back then? No. It's what we know. We recognize it. And fill it with things like that. This would actually have an opening in it to fit a chair underneath, so I would put a chair there. And if I needed to, if I decided that it needed to have an ornate back, I would design that out then. But only until after deciding that. So lastly, I'm going to think about how to surround this with organic prop design. which would be surrounding it with plants or robes. And I thought that oh yes, these. Okay. So what I have observed from other visual development languages is that there's usually something like total shape control. Like it's very clear what the shape is first. Maybe a active side and then a stiff side. So you have a curve plus a hard edge. Or if it's a tree leaf, like if it's a pine tree, then it's a collection of hard top edges and soft line edges on the bottom. If we want to do our own plants, it's going to be, especially in an interior setting, it's going to get a little more detailed than that because we'd be drawing out what those shapes actually are. But I'm just going to riff off of the Rapunzel plants here and imagine that she's got a flower bin that is hanging like this, and this one's in its own flower bin here. So big, medium, and small. Make sure I'm on a different layer. I am. And with this, I'm going to have some plants fall out. And I'm not totally sure if this is what I want yet, but I'm going to try it out, see if it works. The best way to indicate foliage before detailing every single thing is to get your silhouettes broken up. So if these are flowers, I'm going to have some circles. I may just opt for curtains in the long run because drawing a bunch of roses doesn't sound very fun, to be honest. And I don't know how appealing it would look. So one thing I'm doing to get that roundness is compressing the shapes here so that as they get closer to the edge, they look more like thin ellipses. And then here, I'm going to give that whole rose corner facing us more. And last one, this one's got more tree leaves. So let's keep that hard edge here. Change color. And then do all the leaves on the bottom side. Layer it a few times. Then the top side can have more. Now on my original layer, I'll just mask that out. We're nearing the end for this demo here, you guys, bear with me. And so if I properly controlled this line weight, so that there's less emphasis on the internal lines, more emphasis on the outline, all I'm using here is a airbrush. Just very lightly taking away the darkness that I had. And I'll do the same here. I can then go over these. I'm going to use a hard brush and outline, get some T lines in there for fake perspective indication. And this line weight might be way too hard, or it works. I think it works. So now that sits in the scene a little bit more, you can see the actual silhouette of the objects and all of the internal stuff. Still helps to define it, but it's not overwhelming and just visually noisy like it was before. A good rule of thumb for this type of line indication is to outline layers, group objects with one thick line, and if you have overlaps, it's okay to overlap them a little bit. If you use a line or a brush with size jitter, then even better. I've chose not to in this instance, just because there's less to worry about. So then that's how, at a finish, I would probably leave it at that point, and maybe if I needed to, I would go in and darken some places that would naturally have some shadow to them. So top edges might have a little bit more darkness, or the bottom side of top edges, I mean. Okay, so that's how you get that high level of finish, and you don't have to do it all of the time. When you have rounded objects, you can design something in orthographic view and warp it. Takes a little bit of fidgeting, but it can be done. So if you wanted to have a very ornate design that had a bunch of floral patterning, but you didn't want to draw it out like that, you could do it that way. So those are strategies for detailing. And I had almost forgotten that we need to introduce Grayscale. Okay, let's just duplicate this. Flatten it. Now Grayscale, we want to do a simple implementation right now before really making it more difficult than it needs to be. But let's start with a midtone value, especially for an interior, and think about where the light is going to go. That's what we want to focus on first. Don't mess with anything with opacity, none of that. You don't want to fidget around. This is about designing graphic shapes for visual read. So, I think a primary light source is going to be this guy here. That is a fire, in case it wasn't clear. And it's going to be creating this rim light on our character. And all I'm thinking about is just light direction, where things are going. Because I want her to be able to be reading her book. So when you think about creating focal points, it's about light on dark, and stacking things that way. You can introduce overlap and contrast by having a light shape in here, and then there's something light within inside of it, which is overlapping, and then something on top of that is overlapping. So that's how you get contrast, visual overlap. So when you're thinking about composing in a scene and you're putting in your grayscale, just roughing it in, I'm seeing how she's rimlit here, and then the rest of this would be dark. So while this may not be realistic, I'm lighting this bedside because it's motivated. This is a film trick. It looks like it could be motivated by the light and provides that contrast with her arm and her head. So now her profile is visible. Next, I know that this is a light source. And I would go about detailing this in a way want big shapes that transition to to loose shape. So focus on grouping and then parse a little bit away. And if it's a sunny day, this might be coming down this way, which may create this streak that we can use that will also help motivate the lighting more. And now that will help justify putting a 3/4 light on her face. So the rest would be like if we wanted to go about roughing in our grayscale. You might have some ambience from here. Maybe this would have a light streak that would afford you the ability to, you know, guide the eye just a little bit. And then the rest is going to go into shadow. I'm going to start doing a lasso fill. And so, you know, my process is very not good right here. You would hopefully have organized your layers better than I am doing so right now. But this is the idea, is interiors would be lit by lighting from motivated sources rather than massing in foreground to dark, that sort of thing. Just realized I haven't talked for a while. I'm sorry. I know it can be a little dry just watching someone work. So, all that together, the focal points are areas of highest contrast, and that would be where the most light is and the most dark is, which would be her. Then I would use the light sources to help illuminate other things of interest, so we want that. We can add a little bit of top light to top surfaces. Just very receiving ambient light. You can add gradients for extra movement to keep things from getting still. And then let's see. You can start with adding in the gradient of light and then erasing out with a hard brush for hard edges. That's a good method. What is this? What is this? Ah. So yeah, that would be grayscaling a scene. If you were to take this to a finish, I would hope for people to mask out individual objects, and then at least in the focal point, less so in the whole area, but near light sources or in your focal point, work on rendering up to a basic finish. Doesn't have to be amazing, you know, but this would hopefully be the opportunity for portfolio. So spend a little time on the areas that you want people to look at. Okay, does that work for everyone? Any questions before we move on to feedback? No? All right. Okay, Alexander, you were first for submitting. I'll need to wrap this up quickly. So Matthias, I might not get to you right off the bat. I've got a thing at I've got a thing in an hour that I need to be there for my job. So okay, so these were environment push-ups that we were going after. And the idea being get more comfortable with sketching, get more comfortable with putting things in places. You can refer to ideas. It's always never a bad thing. And so I know you were saying that you were struggling, but then you looked up references to sketch from, so that's a great idea. Let's go over that first, so maybe we can get some ideas for how what you're doing could be pushed. So we're looking at a lot of really grand scale environments. If that's what you're interested in, that's awesome. It's a little more difficult with sketching, but that's not to say that we can't do it. So some things that work in large scale environments, the reason they work is because of obscene scale. The cool part is that scenes like this are still made out of just abstract, large graphic shapes. With a little guy. So the whole scene is made of this idea. Then it's a matter of filling that idea out with texturing and details, which is made possible through tiny little things like this. It goes even smaller, and you've got these micro lines that are running repetition of really small objects, and that is implied in the background all the way back there. And you got this little dude up here. Ooh, that thing is massive, right? So that's what sells scale. He's got things that are in the front. Can also check how this could be an asset in sketching. So you just have a grid, a bunch of lines. You copy that multiple times, and you've got an aspect of your environment. You've got a hero prop that you can design, and something like this you could reuse in your own sketch. So that could be moved over here for repetition's sake and scale. So I see that you gravitated towards that as well, which is good. So you've got that repetition here. When you were doing your study, you might have wanted to come in here and see how this was handled, this sort of thing, and how he gets that overlap going with the double lines, because that's a good opportunity to see how people detail large masses. If you wanted, I can't tell if these are buildings, if it's like a favela, or if it's just junk. It's a huge junkyard. But you might, if it's on the shadow side, you might do like a bunch of grimy detail. Break up your silhouette from box so that it's indicated differently. Indicate the transition or the corner with more stuff, and then move away from it slowly. So that can show detail. The thing that I want you to start looking for mainly, Alexander, that I'm starting to see is the geometry. How can we move past boxes to start implementing additional complexity? So for instance, this shape, we're not 3D artists, so we can't get in there and finely detail out every single thing, but this is a straight that then goes in, and right next to it is additional geometry that comes out like this, and maybe it's mirrored on the other side if you wanted to work with that idea yourself. And this now afforded more complexity to that idea. You then pattern it out a couple times, break it up with a big break on that 2080 division that he's got there, just principles of good design. Break that silhouette, and then you might pattern out those edges. So that's how you might approach sketching that when you do a study like that. Same thing
Okay,
here with
thanks.
this. Yeah, with this
Yeah, it's
sign.
like an extra level of detail, isn't it, to get more out of the reference.
Yes. Yeah. That's the biggest one is like, you know, I don't need you to go in here and trace and copy every single thing. That's not what's important when doing these studies. It's getting a feel for the composition, what they're doing, and how they are building on their main statement with complexity. Because that's the hard part of environments, right? Is how do you communicate everything that is in a scene? That environments are way more complex than people. They've got transitions, they've got connectors, they've got all the little gribbles and grobbles that make up something and give it life and realism. So things like that here, cables. Cables are a good shortcut. That there's multiple posts. I see you got this one, but then this one introduces 3-point perspective. It has some stuff to it, and then you connect cables, and that's more complexity in the scene than you had before. This one has some overlapping elements here that go with cables down to the bottom. They show that this continues to go down. And then, yeah, it gets lost in fog. So if you want to indicate that fog, this is too cartoony. I'm way too used to that. But overlapping cloud shapes. Might help with that. And with this design, just seeing, you don't necessarily have to copy it out yourself, but you can look at a reference and see, okay, they've got this this quarter paneling system going on. Double up the lines because I see them connecting in an interesting way. And then they've got some transitions that come away from it that move this down to the main platform. So all those little details plus the buildings in the background that are showing where things are going. Tiny little spaceship up here. So that sort of thing. Understanding the complexity and the depth of what can go into a scene like that. And I only bring that up because you picked these really dense, large-scale ones. So if you wanted to communicate that effectively, that's the sort of thing that you need to look for. Same thing here is, so you've got an opportunity for sketching out a lot of details, and a lot of it is just repetition. So let's find those major shapes. Start with the big shapes. We got a window here, and then that window is subdivided with some cables, and then a big sign breaking up that shape. This is a building with the top of another building on top of it, so that overlap gives you more complexity. Then you have these cables with one basic shape, then smaller shapes inside of it that go up to more pipes, and lots of pipes at scale, showing you things that are moving. There's some cables behind it still. And then all this clutter on the ground, so you can implement that. That can give you an idea for how to work density into your scene and scale. So now that just becomes lines. There's cars. So all of this stuff I want you to start looking for. And the reason I call this geometry instead of details is because these are full physical objects that can be placed in a scene before you even actually detail what they are. So you've got whole big panels, big shapes. You got the tubes. Awesome. And then these buildings keep going. And I'll show you a little tip for when they have very obvious atmospheric perspective like this. So that keeps going, that keeps going. Layering of buildings. Now if you wanted to have this so that this, excuse me. If the lines are too dark or they feel like they're gaining too much attention, you can thin them up. And by lightening their tone, you can still keep all those lines in there, but it's basically mirroring atmospheric perspective when you paint it, but with line.
Okay, yeah, it's like that's a neat trick, just to duplicate the layer to get a bit more density in the foreground.
Yeah. So thicker lines in the foreground, thinner lines in the background,
yeah.
so that you can get more detail, and then lighten their tone, so that you can keep your focal point.
Okay, cool.
And nice, you got stuff here. And then, so see, I see you got this, and that's good. So that's the kind of stuff to look for when noticing how this can introduce more geometry. There's a little bit of perspective so you can see the side plane. Then this repeats one more time. And with each repetition, there's a new level of detail added. So that's not important to the scene itself, but then you have zigzags on the last one. Did they mean anything? No, not really. I guess it's reinforced rebar. It's just a pattern though. It doesn't even seem to have a reason to it. It's just however this artist could make it fit, you know?
Yeah.
So you can see more of that.
Again, it's going to that extra level, isn't it?
Yes. So it's less about the detail, even though I was showing that out, and more about getting everything that you can indicate in an environment. So we've got a building, and then we've got another one, and then let's get another one in there, you know? So getting over this hurdle where what we put down is the end of the canvas, and that's where things stop. I had this same issue before, and it took a long time to get over it. But once it clicks, it should hopefully click pretty well. So check this out. Like, I put this building down. You might think that that's the only thing that we could fit in there. Nope. We can put more. So now all of a sudden there's more depth and density beyond that than there was before. I just put another square in front of it. Make sure that the overlap is there. And now this is like a fairly dense favela street. But everything that goes into a street also counts. So we need lampposts. It's not necessarily detail, but it's geometry. It's additional objects that add to a scene. Cars are going to be sitting in this. And then there's going to be extra stuff on the top of buildings. They have lips to them usually, maybe some pipes and cables. There's going to be usually fans. And then these might connect via cabling. There might be cables between here. So that sort of thing is going to add to what you want. It's the pushing and pulling of an object. So if you have a wall here, you can push this wall out, and maybe this is a stairwell up to a small entrance, right? Like, so now this is a door, and this is a room. Maybe this goes inward, and then there's another building in front of it, explaining why that comes out the way that it does. So just one wall, but all I did here was go in and out, and then work with the new geometry that I have in there as a result. So that's what creates environmental complexity, is by adding all these surfaces.
Yeah, and would you recommend doing like a number of these little sketches before then going in and doing a thumbnail or a push-up to a medium complexity?
These, I would consider these also push-ups.
Okay.
It's just anything, what Kaysen described to us in our sketching course was just getting used to drawing environments and everything that comes with it, and not worrying about a finished product. It's, you want it to remain gestural, but maybe you create a grid and you adhere to the grid so that you don't have to think about the perspective while you're drawing all this in, you know. I would consider these to be push-ups still. And let me skim through what we had done back when.
Yeah, because I feel like mine tend to, if I put more time into it, it doesn't get better. I think I get diminishing returns, and the more time I put in, they seem to look more tight and a bit more sterile.
Yeah. Okay. So like these were push-ups. So
okay.
It was
they've got a really cool kind of like gestural feel to them. They're still tight in terms of perspective, but they're really kind of loose and got a nice feel to them. Whereas I think the more time I put into mine, the perspective gets tight and I lose kind of any kind of gesture.
I see. It's a tough one, right? Like it's really tough. I think what I was doing here, balancing this out, was I did have a grid on, and you can, here I'll show you. When you make a grid, if you want to stay fast, like maybe you make your perfect layout of your room, and then above here I wanted another floor. Excuse me. So now I have the geometry that I need. I wanted a spiral staircase, so I came down, and that's still gestural. And I have these grids here, and I might use them occasionally, and then I might tighten up some other ones. But the initial lay-in is tight, and then when you can work within it and indicate stuff, that's where the gesture comes in. So you can start with your tight grid, your tight layout, giving you a space to work in, and then try to not use a grid outside of that, but have these perspective lines aiding you. And then to help you with keeping the momentum up, once you're done with that sketch, flip it over. And now you've got a whole new layout to play in. And,
okay, that's quite a nice idea.
Now this is a whole different feeling. If it helps, throw some lines down and see how these connect. What can you do with this? I don't know what this means yet. So maybe this will come down here. This one will be bigger. This one will come out this way. And since my grid is on, my perspective assist is on, I'm not worrying about how it makes sense yet. Or I don't have to worry about the perspective of it. I'm just drawing lines and connecting them. So now we have this cityscape. And how would I make this interesting? Well, we would come in and we'd make sure to add a city street. This looks like the area of rest that we might want. So what if maybe it's like a Chinatown? Like this is an entrance gate, But remember how I was talking about shape contrast earlier in this lesson? Let's make that a circle. Now that feels very different from everything else. And it's going to pull interest like that. Then I might just add some more density. And let's see, let's add foreground elements to block this off. It's a trash bin, it's got trash crumpled in it, a trash bag. And then coming in, you need cars. You need people on this street, so they might be, compared to this car, they might be yay big. There might be a dude in the foreground who's trying to cross the street. And then what else did we cover? We need lampposts. So I'm just eyeing this one line here and repeating it down, making sure to make it smaller each time. I do not know if this is accurate to the perspective, but I'm just making sure to shrink it. Let's get some of that geometry in that we talked about, introducing those fans on the sides, some pipes. And then let's layer one, so let's go inward and add those pipes that we saw in your Cyberpunk or Japan City one. Some cables running through it. And then we don't want just boxes, we want to add transitions and caps. So let's add that in. This is gestural still. Some little like gargoyles, how about that? That sort of thing can aid you. Maybe you want to shear an edge, so that would be coming up here and taking off that corner. So now they're not all just boxes, but you have kind of the implication of a rotation in there. That can come down. And you can either choose to provide some sky so we can actually see some air, and then think about busyness that leads down. We have some points of interest that all lead the eye to that Chinatown entrance, and then there's going to be, like, who knows, some dragons here that have got their spooky mouth and their big eyes, their feet, and then there's more people. Stalls are in Chinatown, so you can draw that in there, and so all that is there. And those are the objects that need to live in the scene before you even get to details. A lot of these have open facades with a door, maybe some stairs, so even there's a door there. And that's how you would work your way up, is thinking through, like, what needs to be here, how dense can I get this with random lines, and then once you come up with an idea, if you try to maintain that speed, that's how you can keep that gestural flow going. One more note is, Kaysen said no push-up should last longer than 15 to 45 minutes.
Okay.
And so you, of course, that 45 is going to be a mid to high finish level. So maybe you really get into one and it's working for you, so you keep going. Or if it's taking a long time and you're fighting it, move on after that. Just get another one. So, yeah, I hope that's helpful, Alexander. Those would be my tips for working gesturally.
Yeah, that's helpful, thanks.
Okay, Matthias. Where's my... I might have to hop on later and do a separate recording for you, buddy.
Yeah, no problem, man.
But we do have 30 minutes still until I have to be in a different call, so let's see. Okay. So let's look at what we have. Might even turn this on. Cool. Nice playing with shapes from Vim perspective. All right, very cool. Nice, dude. Good job. Some stuff that comes to mind immediately is I like that you're using your assets. Now we have to manage visual complexity of those assets and the repetition in them. So, like for instance, because of how much they're repeated, it makes them feel flat and then really high density compared to the other things in the scene, right? So some things that I would recommend would be calming this down a tad. Maybe actually the sort of scale that I would think might work a little better would be something like this. A little larger like that, you know? So they started off very dense, and it kind of creates this noise effect. Same for here is the harshness of the asset is going to take away from the rest of the image. So while you did a good job making assets and using them, we want to also work with them in a way that has them aid the scene rather than distract from it. So that level of detail will work. It may even work here, you know, it's just you have to calm it down. And yeah, I think that helps it fit better. You would then adjust it by darkening the lines, maybe coming in and editing just a little bit more so that like specific parts of it are important, and then you can work with that from there. Same here, but just controlling these assets It looks like they're looking outside of a window, so. And I see that with the building, like the building is lighter.
Yeah, it's supposed like to be this super wide window or space.
Now that's a little easier to read, so. I think the repetition is something that would need to be addressed as well, so either staggering these in a way that they're less dense, so maybe you would come in and you would eliminate every other one.
Yeah, man, nice. That's a super good detail.
Right, so that helps break it up a little bit more. And then once we start using these assets, and I know we all had limited time over the holidays, so it's not a big deal. We want to start figuring out how to pull depth out of these assets. So maybe you're going to pull this one back. I thought oh. So much fidgeting I have to do in order just to make a stinking line. So now that goes back into space. And then this is going to connect. Darken the lines, create some geometry where you need it. I mean, darken lines on the silhouette. So see how I'm coming in here and I'm pulling those back, so now that they look like windows. Getting that depth out is going to be the next step to utilizing these assets. And also managing detail. I'm not going to pull it up, but if you remember, I pulled up the Instagram post by Jordan Tuffin a couple of weeks ago. And that was talking about managing line detail in environments in big scenes. And that's part of what would be going on here, is you wouldn't necessarily see all of this stuff that far in the distance. So that becomes a lot of visual noise that from an indication purpose isn't going to be useful for us. So I'm just going to come in here and calm this down. And then to integrate this into the hillside, you would do something like taking away some of the bottom. Whoa. And then showing us how they get here. That'll connect that scene. Throw some more hills to show the space. So part of it is line weight, part of it is the amount of detail that's being communicated with the assets is going overboard just a little bit. So the amount of detail that is afforded with the asset here is not the exact same that should be here. And we'll just have to keep that in mind. When working with things like this feels a little flat because of we want to utilize the assets in a way that shows perspective at work.
Nice. It looks super cool now. Man.
Yeah, so you had it there, but it just needed to be integrated with the environment a little more. Now you extrude back, and this has some extra depth to it. I don't know, I'm just putting lines down. Don't necessarily follow that. But you know, the same would go here. This shows flatness. This doesn't.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, well, I'm gonna pick on you for your line weight. Just make sure that gets managed. Maybe consider doing light lines first and then darkening the stuff, or lowering the opacity and darkening the things that you need to. Because for instance, these internal lines would be easier to make sense of if they're lightened. And then we only see these edges prioritized.
Yeah, like the overlapping elements, right?
Yeah, the outline of this silhouette is overlapping with the next space, and that's what's important to the scene, is understanding where each column is, not necessarily the super dark detail on the column.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna be playing a lot more with this asset stuff, man. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. I'm glad that you were having fun with it. That's good. The same would, those can all be pushed. So assets aren't a perfect solution, but they get you there. They save you a ton of work. So push that up. And now that has geometry to it.
Yeah.
So you're really close there. Let's see. We got 20 minutes, 18 minutes. Stuff like this, I would address in the following way. I think this is too much. One thing we might want a hall. Perspective of the asset might be a little off here. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, no, it's super.
Okay.
Super off.
then this can go in this direction. So that's going to break up the visual noise of the repetition of this asset. So now that looks like it's going more in a different place, so that's just going into expanding our environment design beyond just a hallway. And then I would also have messed with the patterns so that you had like a bigger gap in between. So don't just repeat it ad nauseum. Add a big break element with something else. Okay? And maybe that's circles. And they come in some so that there's a break. Going off of your circle ideas from earlier.
Yeah.
So that'll help change things up. And then the same advice would be to calm down this detail. You can have it, but that amount of detail would work, but you need to break it up. So you can't have just, it can't be all one thing. It'll have to be that you've got this detail, then you break it up with something else, and maybe that is a chandelier. So adding that repetition rather than it just being a series of lines is going to help the delivery of those assets. So I think part of it is just the sheer repetition that creates the thing that I am identifying. If you break it apart with other design elements, so you have some variance in there, and then you control the line weight internally, and then finally break it apart so that you introduce new geometry, would be the ways to utilize your assets more effectively.
Thanks, man.
I think that's all that I've got. It's then beyond this, I would say additional stuff like I'm still seeing signs of losing the end of the world, you know. I'd still say that you could have more stuff here that looks like there's still things, and a little bit more hill coming from. This reminds me of Rio de Janeiro.
Yeah, it was kind of inspired on that one.
Cool. So those overlapping lines, and that compositionally, it's, if this was the focus, this should not be here. This is a 50-50 almost divider between what we want to look at and the person of interest. And compositionally, one of the things we want to avoid is, I did it in my image on purpose. I framed the girl here behind this bed frame because I wanted her to feel trapped, and she's not trying to go somewhere. If you have an image where you have a point of interest, which in your case was the statue here, it's got a pathway and a little tiny guy here, you don't want to put something in the middle that is going to obstruct your eye from seeing what the goal is. Because it either feels like it is the most important thing because it's placed right in the middle, or it's going to break up the eye's path. They're going to start assessing all this, and then they're led away from the thing that's important. Okay?
Thank you.
So if we were to very crudely edit this, It helps a little bit more. That's how, just from just doing emergency surgery, you would just reversing those around would help address that. Okay. Rafi, did you have anything? No? Okay. Some other tips. I know that these are still in the very sketchy phase, so
Super rough.
yeah, so I'm not going to worry about it too much. I would talk about just the point of, for learning purposes, would be handling line weight. In the foreground, you can have a thick line outlining your subject so that you know where things are going on. Then you might hatch dark spaces, or you would just have drop cast shadows entirely. And then with each level of element, your line weight would decrease in weight, either by getting lighter or thinness. Double up on the line, control it and get that outline in place. Then you can reduce the weight of the inside, so now that object feels like it's in front of the stuff behind it, and you can identify what the silhouette is first. So there, that's that. Yeah, that's all I have to say on that. It's definitely keep experimenting, seeing how you can use assets. My main advice would be don't over rely on them. So don't have a big panel and then fill that whole panel with one flat thing. Instead, let's see. I'll make my own little canvas here. Here's my canvas. So you've got these walls leading down to this guy. Instead of having them all line up like this and then repeat a bunch of assets, design your asset with an extra thing in it, then have your stuff, so that can break up the repetitiveness. But then come in here and break up your geometry as well. Add another column in here or something. So now those panels will fill in here. And they'll feel much less repeated, because you have other stuff going on there.
Yeah.
Then you can fill the corners with like a new object, a big sphere, then have a corner, and then more wall. So things can be designed out a little bit more rather than having a basic room and paneling it all with one asset. So that'll help the believability. And that's everything I've got, guys. I'll take a 7-minute break before my work call. So
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, man.
Yeah, thanks, Alex.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let me pull up the homework again just so we can talk about it one more time and make sure that I know where I'm going. Okay, so I might edit this a little bit. The assignment is 1, prop design. So here we will take a pot. Where am I? Take a pot and draw it 3 different ways. So you'll have a real pot from reference. It doesn't have to be a pot either. You can pick a chair or a box and then design it 3 different ways. How can you push this pot? Then take that pot and design that one 3 different ways. How far can you push that one into something else? So that's how you start experimenting with design. Look at style from other sources. It can be realistic, it can be real life, it can be animation. Then the full assignment is going to be making an interior. So you either pick your best one from last week and improve on it. So knowing what we went over this week, that would mean improve. Increase geometry. So increase geo plus livability. What is the sense that this is a real space with real power lines, real tubes, pipes, and trash and stuff like that, if that's the kind of space that you're creating? So you can improve one that you like, or you can thumbnail 3 scenes, refer to an artist that you like, maybe study them a couple times, and then try again 3 more times. And pick from your best one and start to finish it. So a finish would be mix of dedicated ortho design, orthographic, which is where I showed you creating the asset separately, and designing, let's call it off the cuff. So that would just be gestural. Of course you need to clean it up, but smaller objects, not everything needs to be an asset, right? Not everything has to be perfectly designed. So the stuff that you would spend a lot of time designing is going to be key points of interest. The focal point, points surrounding your character, architecture, and furniture. Stuff that requires a lot. Remember line weight? All of the additional little props and things, that's as simple as just playing around and coming up with something you like. Okay? So by the end of it, my grayscale interior looked like this, and I'll put that in the, I'll just do it right now. I had the photo saved. So I worked from a reference, an artistic reference that helped me out. I went with sci-fi, so I did have help. This wasn't purely from imagination. And then I went in and I referenced things like Bungie's Destiny for the architecture. I looked at different jet designs to make something new. And so I was thinking through like the sort of like this holds the plane, right? It moves it around. They've got people, they're working on little tables and desks that have computers that control the machinery. Then this is a runway, and we got tools and objects, pipes with, look, there's nothing crazy about these pipes, it's just repeating the geometry of it, but adding more. Underneath it, it's not just one thing, but there's added geometry that comes out. This one goes in, so then now that's a grate. So that's how you start breaking things up. And this sort of finish would be nice to get to. Don't worry about it too hard. But the higher you aim, the more of it you'll pull off, and you'll probably surprise yourself. So that's everything I got. So thanks, guys. Thanks for
Thanks, Alex.
sitting with me. and hope this goes well. So,
Yeah. Cheers, mate. Appreciate it.
bye bye.
Yeah.
See you guys.
Good luck, man.
Hello.
Hello?
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
I hear you. I hear both of you. Can you hear me?
Awesome.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for tuning in. Alex, what time zone are you in anyway? I'm just curious.
I'm in Central, so I'm
I'm
2
in-
hours after you.
Yeah, I'm in Eastern, so I'm 3 hours. So it's noon for me now.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So good afternoon to you all. Good morning for me.
Good morning to you.
Okay, so let me just start the screen share.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Okay, can you see my screen all right?
Yep.
Okay, so so for today's call, we're gonna go over two main things. We're gonna go over what I kind of look for in a rough,
Mhm.
and Norali also wanted me to kind of go over the lighting sequence for the song segment.
Yeah.